The gunshot shattered the silence of the Arizona desert, sending a plume of dust into the air just inches from the lead horse's hooves. The animal reared in fright, nearly toppling the wagon that trundled along the lonely trail north of Superior. Inside the covered wagon, Naomi and Nora Lancaster clutched each other, their wrists raw from the rope that bound them together. "Keep those horses steady," barked a voice from the driver's bench. "We ain't stopping till we reach the territory line." It was 1878, and the Lancaster sisters had been traveling against their will for 3 days now, taken by force from their family ranch after their father's death left them vulnerable. The man who'd orchestrated their abduction was Silas Corbin, a wealthy mine owner who'd had his eye on their land since silver had been discovered in the nearby hills. "You ain't going anywhere," came another voice, deep and commanding from somewhere beyond the wagon cover. "Not with those ladies." Naomi, the elder sister at 22, peered through a tear in the canvas. A lone rider sat atop a chestnut stallion, rifle aimed squarely at the driver. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but the set of his shoulders spoke of a man who wouldn't back down. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," Corbin's man shouted back. "These women are being transported legally." The mysterious rider urged his horse forward. "Then you won't mind showing me the papers that say so." Inside the wagon, Nora, just 18 and trembling with fear, whispered to her sister. "Who is that?" "I don't know," Naomi replied, hope fluttering in her chest for the first time in days. "But I think he might be our only chance." What they couldn't see was the fury in the rider's eyes as he took in the sisters' predicament. Yates Jackson had been trailing this wagon since it left Superior, suspecting something wasn't right when he'd witnessed 2 women being loaded inside before dawn, their protests muffled but unmistakable. "Last chance," Yates called out, cocking his rifle with deliberate slowness. "Release those women or I start putting holes in things." His gaze was steady, his trigger finger ready. The driver looked nervously at the guard beside him, who was reaching slowly for his holster. "Don't," Yates warned, shifting his aim slightly. "I can put a bullet through your hand faster than you can draw." For a moment, the desert air hung thick with tension, broken only by the soft whicker of horses and the creak of leather. Then the guard's hand moved in a blur, and Yates fired. The guard's pistol flew from his grasp as he howled, clutching his bleeding hand. "Next one won't be so merciful," Yates said, his voice as dry as the desert surrounding them. "Now step down, both of you." The driver swore but complied, followed reluctantly by the injured guard. Yates dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on the men as he approached the wagon. "Ladies, are you all right in there?" Naomi's voice came back, stronger than he expected. "We're tied up but unharmed. Who are you?" "Name's Yates Jackson. I'm going to get you out of there." He edged closer to the wagon, never taking his eyes off the 2 men. "But first, these gentlemen are going to walk about 20 paces that way and sit themselves down." Once the men were seated at a safe distance, Yates holstered his rifle and pulled back the wagon cover. The sight that greeted him made his blood boil. 2 young women, their dresses travel-stained and their wrists bound with coarse rope, stared back at him with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. "Let's get those ropes off," he said, drawing a knife from his belt. As he cut through their bonds, Naomi studied their rescuer. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His hands were calloused but gentle as he freed them. "Thank you," she said, rubbing her wrists once they were free. "They took us from our home 3 days ago. Our father died last month, and you can tell me everything once we're safe," Yates interrupted, helping Nora down from the wagon. "Right now, we need to move before their friends come looking." They said they were taking us to work in a house up north, Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not the kind of work decent women do. Yates' jaw tightened. They won't be taking you anywhere now. He turned to face the men on the ground. You two are going to stay right where you are until we've gone. If I see either of you move before we're out of sight, I won't be aiming at hands. The driver spat in the dirt. Corbin will have your hide for this, Cowboy. He's welcome to try, Yates replied, helping the sisters onto his horse. But he'll have to find me first. With Naomi seated behind him and Nora perched on the wagon driver's horse, which Yates had commandeered, they rode away from the scene, heading west instead of continuing north. Yates knew the territory well enough to avoid the main trails, taking them through dry washes and over rocky terrain where they'd be difficult to follow. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, he guided them to a small canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a small oasis of green in the otherwise barren landscape. We'll rest here for the night, he said, helping Naomi dismount. It's hidden enough that we should be safe, and the horses need water. Nora slid from her horse with less grace, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed riding. How did you know to look for us? She asked, curiosity finally overcoming her fear. Yates unsaddled the horses, giving himself a moment to organize his thoughts. I was in Superior picking up supplies when I overheard some men talking about a job for Corbin, something about transporting merchandise north. Didn't sound right. When I saw the wagon leaving before dawn with you two inside, I decided to follow. You risked your life for strangers, Naomi said, helping him spread blankets near the spring. Yates shrugged. Some things a man can't ignore. He pulled some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. It's not much of a meal, but it'll keep you going. As they ate, the sisters told him their story. The Lancaster ranch had been in their family for 2 generations, situated on what had recently been discovered to be silver-rich land. Their father's sudden death had left them vulnerable, and Silas Corbin had wasted no time in making his move, first with offers to buy the land for a pittance, then with threats, and finally with violence. We have nowhere to go now, Nora concluded, her young face somber in the firelight. Corbin will be watching the ranch, and we have no other family. Yates fed a stick into the small, smokeless fire he'd built. I have a cabin about a day's ride from here. It's not much, but you'd be safe there until we figure out what to do about Corbin. We? Naomi questioned, her eyes meeting his across the flames. I've got no love for men like Corbin, Yates said simply. And I don't leave jobs half done. That night, as the sisters slept, wrapped in his spare blankets, Yates kept watch, his mind turning over the problem before him. He'd made an enemy of Silas Corbin, one of the most powerful men in the territory. The safest thing would be to take the Lancaster sisters to the nearest town with a proper lawman and wash his hands of the whole affair. But as he watched Naomi's peaceful face in the moonlight, something in his chest tightened. He hadn't expected to feel such an immediate connection to the fierce young woman with determination in her eyes and dignity, despite her circumstances. There was something about her that called to the part of him that had been wandering for years, never quite finding a place to settle. Morning came with the chatter of desert birds and the soft light of dawn filtering through the canyon walls. Yates had already prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and more hardtack by the time the sisters woke. We should move soon, he said, passing Naomi a tin cup of steaming coffee. Corbin's men will be searching by now. As they broke camp, Naomi approached him, her expression resolute. Mr. Jackson, I want you to know that we're grateful for your help, but we can't expect you to risk yourself further. If you could just point us toward the nearest town, Miss Lancaster, Yates interrupted gently. I've already made my decision. I'm seeing this through." Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first stirrings of something deeper. Whatever it was, it sent a warmth through Yates that had nothing to do with the rising desert sun. The journey to Yates' cabin took them through increasingly rugged terrain, climbing into the foothills where pine trees began to replace cactus, and the air grew cooler. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and there in a small clearing stood a modest log cabin with a corral to one side and a thin stream of smoke rising from the stone chimney. "Someone's there," Naomi said, tensing on the horse behind him. "That'll be Henry," Yates replied, urging his horse forward. "My partner. He watches the place when I'm away." As they approached, an older man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the cabin, shotgun in hand. Upon recognizing Yates, he lowered the weapon, though his eyebrows rose at the sight of the two women. "Bringing home strays now, are we?" he called out, his voice gruff but his eyes twinkling. Yates dismounted and helped the sisters down. "Henry, this is Miss Naomi Lancaster and Miss Nora Lancaster. Ladies, this is Henry Walsh, the orneriest old prospector this side of the Mississippi. And the best cook, too," Henry added, tipping his hat to the women. "Though I wasn't expecting company for supper." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with 2 rooms separated by a curtain. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture filled the main space. Nora, exhausted from the journey, was shown to the only bed behind the curtain, while Henry began preparing a meal that smelled infinitely better than the trail rations they'd been subsisting on. While Nora rested, Naomi sat at the table with Yates and explained their situation more fully to Henry, who listened with increasing indignation. "Silas Corbin, eh?" he spat when she'd finished. "That man's been a plague on decent folks for years. Heard he's got half the lawmen in the territory in his pocket, which is why we need to be careful," Yates said. "He'll be looking for us, and he's got the men and money to make a thorough job of it." Henry stroked his beard thoughtfully. "What about that ranch of yours? You planning to go back?" Naomi stared down at her hands. "It's all we have, all our father left us, but I don't see how we can reclaim it with Corbin's men watching it." "Well, you're welcome here as long as you need," Henry said firmly. "Any enemy of Corbin's is a friend of mine." That evening, as they ate Henry's surprisingly delicious venison stew, Yates couldn't help but notice how the firelight played across Naomi's features, softening them, highlighting the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. She'd been through hell, yet here she was, discussing plans, looking after her sister, facing their uncertain future with a courage that many men would envy. After supper, with Nora already asleep and Henry snoring in a chair by the fire, Yates and Naomi stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars spread above them in a dazzling display, far from the smoke and light of any town. "I've never seen so many stars," Naomi murmured, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They've always been there," Yates replied, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Just hidden by other lights." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Naomi turned to face him. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Jackson? Truly, you don't know us. You don't owe us anything." Yates considered her question, looking out over the darkened forest. "My father was a rancher like yours. When I was 15, men came and burned us out because they wanted our water rights. He fought back and they killed him for it." His voice was steady, matter-of-fact, but Naomi could hear the old pain beneath the words. "No one stood up for us then. Maybe that's why I couldn't ride past when I saw what was happening to you and your sister." Naomi's hand found his in the darkness, a tentative touch that conveyed more than words could. "I'm sorry about your father." It was a long time ago, Yates said, though the warmth of her hand in his seemed to ease an ache he'd carried for years. But it taught me something about the kind of man I wanted to be. They stayed like that for a moment, connected by touch and shared understanding, before the sound of a branch breaking in the forest brought them back to their present danger. "Inside," Yates whispered, drawing his pistol. "Wake Henry, but keep quiet." The night passed tensely, but no attack came. Whatever had made the noise animal or human had moved on. By morning, however, Yates was certain they couldn't stay at the cabin. If Corbin's men were searching the area, it would only be a matter of time before they were found. "We need to move," he told the others over breakfast. "There's an old mining camp about a day's ride from here. It's abandoned now, but the buildings are still sound and it's well hidden. We'll be safer there while we figure out our next move." "I'll stay here," Henry said, checking the loads in his shotgun. "Make it look like nothing's changed." "Might throw them off your trail for a while," Naomi protested. "We can't leave you to face them alone." Henry's weathered face crinkled in a smile. "Been handling myself in these mountains for 30 years, miss. Besides, I'm just a harmless old prospector as far as they know. Got no connection to you or your troubles." Before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge, Yates and the Lancaster sisters were on their way again, traveling through dense forest on game trails that would be difficult to follow. Yates rode ahead, alert for any sign of pursuit, while the sisters followed on the second horse. "What do you think of him?" Nora asked softly, her arms around her sister's waist as they rode. "Who? Mr. Jackson?" Naomi kept her eyes on the broad shoulders of the man ahead of them. "He seems honorable. We're lucky he found us." "That's not what I meant," Nora replied, and Naomi could hear the smile in her voice. "I saw you two outside last night. We were just talking," Naomi said, feeling an unexpected heat in her cheeks. "Don't go spinning romantic fantasies, Nora. We're in danger, and Mr. Jackson is simply being kind." "If you say so," Nora murmured, unconvinced. "But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him." Naomi had no reply to that because she wasn't entirely sure her sister was wrong. There was something about Yates Jackson that drew her, something beyond gratitude for their rescue. But now wasn't the time for such thoughts. They had to focus on survival. The abandoned mining camp was tucked into a narrow valley, its weathered buildings nearly invisible against the rocky slopes, until they were almost upon it. A half-dozen structures remained, some listing slightly with age but still standing. The largest, which had once been the mine office, would serve as their shelter. "It's not exactly the Lancaster ranch," Yates said as they dismounted, "but it's defensible and out of sight." Inside, the building was dusty but intact, with a stone fireplace similar to the one in Yates' cabin and enough furniture left behind to make it habitable. While the sisters cleaned the worst of the dust, Yates secured the horses in what had once been a stable and checked the perimeter of the camp. As evening approached, Naomi found him sitting on a boulder at the edge of the camp, staring thoughtfully at the setting sun. "May I join you?" she asked, and he shifted to make room for her. "I was just thinking about our next steps," he said as she settled beside him. "Corbin won't give up easily. He wants your land, and men like him aren't used to being denied." "What do you suggest?" Yates ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she'd noticed he made when deep in thought. "We need evidence of what he's done. Kidnapping is a hanging offense, even in this territory. If we could prove it, even Corbin's money couldn't save him." "And how do we get such evidence when we're hiding in the mountains?" Naomi asked, practical despite her weariness. "I know people in Superior," Yates replied. "People who don't like Corbin any more than we do, if I could get word to them." Their conversation was interrupted by Nora's call for supper, a simple meal of beans and bacon that she'd prepared over the fireplace. As they ate, Yates outlined his plan to ride into a small settlement about half a day away where he could send a message to his contacts in Superior. "It's risky," he acknowledged, "but less risky than staying in one place too long or trying to face Corbin head-on." "And what about us?" Nora asked, her young face serious in the firelight. "Are we just supposed to wait here while you risk yourself again?" "I need you both to stay hidden," Yates said firmly. "If Corbin's men catch you again." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They all knew what fate awaited the sisters if they were recaptured. That night, as Nora slept in a makeshift bed of blankets near the fire, Naomi found herself unable to rest. The events of the past few days kept replaying in her mind the terror of their abduction, the relief of rescue, and now this strange limbo of hiding and waiting. And through it all, the steady presence of Yates Jackson, a man who'd had no reason to involve himself in their troubles but had done so without hesitation. She rose quietly and stepped outside, needing air. The night was clear and cool, with that same spectacular display of stars overhead. She'd wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the chill, but still shivered slightly as a breeze whispered through the abandoned camp. "Couldn't sleep." Yates' voice came from nearby, and she turned to find him seated on the steps of the building, his rifle across his knees. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, joining him on the weathered wood. "What about you? Someone needs to keep watch." His profile was strong in the starlight, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp. "You need rest too," Naomi said gently. "I can take a turn." Yates looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something flutter in her chest. "You've got enough to handle without losing sleep on guard duty." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Jackson," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "And I'm not one to let others shoulder all the burden." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've noticed that about you, Miss Lancaster." "Naomi," she corrected him softly. "After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Naomi," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her breath catch. "Then I'm Yates." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the forest around them. Naomi found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way his hands rested confidently on his rifle, the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. "Tell me about your ranch," Yates said eventually, breaking the silence. "What was it like growing up there?" Naomi smiled at the memories his question evoked. "It was beautiful. Not large compared to some, but good land with a year-round stream running through it. Our mother died when Nora was just a baby, so it was mostly just us and our father. He taught us everything: how to ride, how to manage the cattle, even how to shoot." Her smile faded slightly. "He always said we needed to be twice as capable as any man to get half the respect in this territory." "Sounds like a wise man," Yates observed. "He was." Naomi pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "When he died, it was sudden. A fever that took him in just 3 days. Nora and I tried to keep things running. We thought we could manage, but then Corbin started making his offers, and when we refused—" She trailed off, the memory of those frightening days still too fresh. Yates' hand found hers in the darkness, a warm, solid presence. "You'll get your home back," he promised, "one way or another." Naomi wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the quiet confidence of his words, but doubt crept in as persistent as the night chill. "And if we can't, if Corbin is too powerful, too connected, then we find you a new home," Yates said simply, "but we don't give up without trying." The way he said, "we," as if their fates were somehow linked beyond this immediate crisis, sent a warmth through Naomi that had nothing to do with the blanket around her shoulders. It had been so long since she'd had anyone to share her burdens with, anyone besides Nora to consider in her decisions. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words seemed inadequate for all she wanted to express. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes, and they lapsed back into silence, their hands still joined on the step between them. The next morning, Yates prepared to leave for the settlement. He'd given the sisters detailed instructions on what to do if he didn't return by nightfall, including where to find a cache of supplies he'd hidden in the forest and which direction to flee if they heard anyone approaching. "Remember, stay inside during the day," he reminded them as he saddled his horse. "No fires that might make smoke visible from a distance, and keep your pistol close, Naomi." He'd given her one of his revolvers the night before, after she'd mentioned her father teaching her to shoot. She checked it now, the weight unfamiliar but not unwelcome in her hands. "We'll be fine," she assured him, though her heart raced at the thought of him leaving. "Just be careful." Yates mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll be back before sunset," he promised. As he rode away, Naomi watched until he disappeared into the trees, fighting the urge to call him back. Beside her, Nora squeezed her hand. "He'll be all right," her sister said confidently. "He strikes me as the type who always comes back." Inside the old mine office, the sisters busied themselves making the place more livable, sweeping away decades of dust and arranging their meager belongings. Naomi kept the pistol within reach at all times, her ears attuned to any sound from outside that might signal danger. By midday, the waiting had become almost unbearable. Nora suggested exploring the other buildings in the camp to pass the time, but Naomi vetoed the idea, unwilling to disobey Yates' instructions to stay hidden. "You're sweet on him, aren't you?" Nora asked abruptly, setting aside the shirt she'd been mending. "I hardly know him," Naomi protested, but even to her own ears the words sounded hollow. "Sometimes you don't need a long time to know," Nora said with the certainty of youth. "Father always said he knew he'd marry Mother the first day he met her." Naomi remembered those stories, how their father's eyes would soften when he spoke of their mother, even years after her death. That was different. They met at a social, not while he was rescuing her from kidnappers. "I don't see why that matters," Nora replied pragmatically. "The way you look at each other is the same." Before Naomi could formulate a response, a sound from outside froze them both: the unmistakable clatter of horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving quickly and making no attempt at stealth. "Get behind the counter," Naomi whispered urgently, grabbing the pistol. "And stay down no matter what happens." Nora obeyed instantly, sliding into the space behind what had once been the mine office's counter, while Naomi positioned herself beside a window, peering cautiously through a crack in the boards that covered it. What she saw made her blood run cold. 4 riders were entering the camp, and at their head was a man she recognized immediately: Silas Corbin himself, his expensive suit and silver-tipped cane incongruous in the rugged setting. "Search every building," he ordered his men, his voice carrying clearly to where Naomi hid. "They're here somewhere. That old fool at the cabin wouldn't have lied with my knife at his throat. Henry." Naomi's heart sank. They must have found him and forced him to reveal where Yates had taken them. She prayed the old prospector was still alive. The men dismounted, drawing their weapons as they spread out toward the various buildings. One headed straight for the mine office, his spurs jangling with each step. Naomi raised the pistol, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. She'd never shot a man before, but she would not let them take Nora again, would not let them use her sister as leverage against Yates when he returned. The door handle turned, and Naomi held her breath. The door began to open, and she tightened her finger on the trigger. A shot rang out, but not from her gun. The man at the door jerked backwards with a cry, clutching his shoulder. More gunfire erupted from the direction of the forest, and Naomi heard Corbin shouting orders to his men, his voice tinged with panic. "Get to cover. It's an ambush." Through the crack in the boards, Naomi saw a familiar figure on horseback emerging from the trees, rifle raised. Yates. And behind him rode 3 more men, all firing at Corbin and his henchmen. The battle was brief but intense. Caught in the open and outnumbered, Corbin's men were quickly driven back. One fell and did not rise again. Another was wounded but managed to remount his horse. Corbin himself seemed untouched as he retreated, but the fury on his face was visible even from a distance. "This isn't over, Jackson," he shouted as he galloped away, his remaining men close behind. "I'll see you hang for this." As the sounds of the retreating horses faded, Naomi rushed to the door, pistol still in hand. Yates was dismounting, his expression grim but relieved when he saw her emerge unharmed. "Nora?" he asked immediately. "She's safe," Naomi assured him as her sister appeared in the doorway behind her. "What happened? Who are these men?" Yates gestured to his companions who were checking the fallen man and securing the area. "Friends from Superior. I was on my way to send word when I ran into them on the trail. They'd already heard about what happened to you and were coming to offer help." One of the men approached, a badge glinting on his chest. "Sheriff Tom Riley, Miss Lancaster. We've been looking for a way to bring Corbin down for years, but he's always been too careful, too connected." He nodded respectfully to her. "Your situation might be just what we need." "Corbin said something about Henry," Naomi said anxiously. "Is he?" "Alive," Yates confirmed, "but hurt. Corbin and his men found the cabin this morning. Henry put up a fight and took a beating for it, but he managed to give them false information, told them we were headed north toward the territorial border, not here. They were just checking this place on their way." Relief washed over Naomi, followed quickly by concern. "We need to help him." "My deputy's with him now," Sheriff Riley said. "We'll get him proper care once we deal with this situation." Inside the mine office, the sheriff explained their plan. With Corbin now directly involved in violence against Henry and the attempted recapture of the Lancaster sisters, they had enough to bring charges against him if they could get testimonies safely to the circuit judge. "It won't be easy," Riley warned. "Corbin still has men loyal to him in Superior and connections throughout the territory. But if we move quickly and keep you ladies safe until the judge arrives next week, we have a chance." "And our ranch?" Nora asked quietly. "If we can prove Corbin's crimes, all his recent acquisitions will come under scrutiny," the sheriff replied, "including any claims he's made on your property." That night, with 2 of Riley's men standing guard outside, the atmosphere in the old mine office was cautiously hopeful. The sheriff and his other deputy had ridden back toward Superior to prepare for the judge's arrival, promising to return in 2 days with more men and supplies. Yates found Naomi by the fireplace after Nora had gone to sleep, her face thoughtful in the flickering light. "You did well today," he said, sitting beside her. "Not many would have kept their heads like you did." She looked up, a small smile softening her features. "I had good reason to stay calm. Nora needed me to be strong." "It's more than that," Yates said, his voice low so as not to wake her sister. "You have a kind of strength that has nothing to do with circumstances. I've seen it from the moment we met." Something in his tone made Naomi's heart quicken. "You make me sound like some kind of heroine from a dime novel." "No," Yates replied, his eyes serious. "Heroines in those stories are usually waiting to be rescued. You were ready to fight, even before I arrived." Their gazes held, and Naomi became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "Yates," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, but feeling that something needed to be spoken. "When this is over, when Corbin is dealt with and we can return to our ranch." "Yes," he prompted when she hesitated. "What will you do then?" she finally asked. The real question, will you stay? Remaining unspoken but hanging in the air between them. Yates was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I've been wandering a long time," he said at last. "Never found a place that felt right to settle, but recently." He looked at her again, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Recently I've been thinking it might be nice to stop wandering." Before Naomi could respond, a sound from outside drew their attention, one of the deputies calling for Yates. The moment broken, they both rose, Yates reaching for his gun out of habit. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the door. But the news wasn't danger this time. A rider had arrived with word from Superior. The circuit judge had arrived early and was ready to hear their case against Corbin as soon as they could bring the Lancaster sisters to town. "This changes things," Yates said after the deputy explained. "We'll have to leave at first light, take a different route into town. Corbin will be watching the main trails." "But it's good news, isn't it?" Naomi asked. "The sooner we can present our case, the sooner this will be over." Yates nodded, though his expression remained serious. "It's our best chance, but also the most dangerous moment. Corbin will be desperate once he hears the judge is in town, and desperate men do desperate things." The journey to Superior the next day was tense, with Yates and the deputies constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of ambush. They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails and crossing several streams to break their trail. Naomi rode double with Yates, while Nora shared a horse with one of the deputies. As they neared town, they could see smoke rising from multiple chimneys, the bustle of the mining community visible even from a distance. Sheriff Riley met them at the edge of town, his expression grim. "Corbin's gathered his men," he reported. "They're watching the roads and making threats around town. But Judge Harmon is waiting for us at my office, and I've got deputies guarding the building." They entered Superior by a back route, avoiding the main street with its saloons and shops where Corbin's men might be watching. The sheriff's office was a solid stone building near the center of town, one of the few structures built to withstand both the elements and potential attacks. Inside, Judge Marshall Harmon awaited them, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened carefully as Naomi and Nora recounted their ordeal, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions that revealed his thorough understanding of the law. "This is serious indeed," he said when they had finished. "Kidnapping, attempted forced prostitution, assault on Mr. Walsh, attempted murder of a peace officer. Sheriff Riley tells me one of his deputies was shot during yesterday's confrontation." He removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. "With your testimonies and those of Mr. Jackson and the sheriff's men, we have more than enough to issue an arrest warrant for Silas Corbin." "He won't come quietly," Yates warned. The judge's expression hardened. "Then he will face the consequences of that decision as well." "I did not ride 3 days through Apache territory to be intimidated by a silver baron with delusions of being above the law." Sheriff Riley was dispatched with the warrant and 4 deputies, while the Lancaster sisters remained at the jail under Yates' protection. The wait was agonizing, the minutes stretching into hours as they listened for any news from outside. When gunfire erupted somewhere in town, Naomi and Nora clutched each other's hands, their faces pale. Yates moved to the window, his rifle ready. "Stay away from the windows and doors," he instructed them, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his posture. More shots rang out, closer now, followed by shouting and the sound of running feet. Yates positioned himself between the door and the sisters, ready to defend them if the worst happened. The door burst open, and they all tensed, but it was Sheriff Riley who entered, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "It's done," he announced. "Corbin resisted arrest, tried to shoot his way out, but we had him surrounded. He's wounded but alive and under guard at the doctor's. His men have scattered or surrendered." Relief washed over them all, the tension of the past days finally breaking. Nora began to cry quietly, while Naomi felt a curious numbness, as if her body didn't quite know how to process the sudden absence of fear. Yates moved to her side, his hand finding hers. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now, you both are." In the days that followed, Superior buzzed with the news of Silas Corbin's arrest and the shocking details of his crimes against the Lancaster sisters. Judge Harmon held a formal hearing, where additional witnesses came forward with stories of Corbin's intimidation and corruption, emboldened by his downfall. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge ordered Corbin held for trial in Tucson, with additional charges likely to be added as more of his dealings came to light. As for the Lancaster ranch, the judge issued a clear ruling all claims Corbin had made on the property were fraudulent, and the land belonged legally and completely to Naomi and Nora Lancaster. "You can go home," the judge told them after announcing his decision. With no fear of further harassment. The words were simple, but they brought tears to Naomi's eyes. Home. After everything that had happened, they could return to the place their father had built, the only home they'd ever known. But as they prepared to leave Superior, Naomi found herself conflicted. Going home meant leaving behind the man who had saved them, who had become so important to her in such a short time. Yates had been busy helping Sheriff Riley round up the last of Corbin's men, and they'd had little time to speak privately since the arrest. The evening before their planned departure, Naomi found him at the livery stable, checking the horses they would ride back to the ranch. Henry, recovered enough to travel but still moving gingerly, was coming with them to help get the ranch running again. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" she asked, watching as Yates adjusted a saddle. He nodded, straightening to face her. "The trail should be safe now, but Sheriff Riley's sending a deputy to ride with you just to be sure." "And you?" Naomi asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally finding voice. "Will you be coming as well?" Yates hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," Naomi said simply, finding courage in the moment. "I want you to come with us, with me." He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool evening air. "I've been thinking about what you asked me about what I'll do now that this is over. And I keep coming back to one answer." "Which is," she prompted when he paused. "That I want to be wherever you are," Yates said, his voice low and certain, "if you'll have me." The words sent a rush of joy through Naomi, so intense that for a moment she couldn't speak. Instead, she reached for him, her hands finding the rough fabric of his shirt and pulling him closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the quiet of the stable with only the horses as witnesses. When they parted, Naomi saw in Yates' eyes the same wonder and certainty she felt in her own heart. "Is that a yes?" he asked with a small smile. "Yes," she whispered against his lips before kissing him again, more boldly this time. "That's a definite yes." The journey back to the Lancaster ranch took 2 days, traveling at a pace that wouldn't strain Henry's healing injuries. As they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, the small house, the corral, the barn, all looking a little worse for wear but blessedly intact, Naomi felt a surge of emotion that brought tears to her eyes. Beside her, Yates reached over to squeeze her hand. "Welcome home," he said softly. The work of reclaiming the ranch was substantial. In the month they'd been gone, much had fallen into disrepair. Fences needed mending, the house needed cleaning, and most of their cattle had scattered across the range. But they were not alone in the task. Henry proved invaluable, despite his injuries, directing repairs to the barn and corral. Sheriff Riley sent word to neighboring ranchers about the Lancaster sisters' return, and several came to help round up the scattered herd, pleased to see Corbin's influence diminishing in the area. And through it all, Yates was there fixing the roof of the house, rebuilding fences, riding out at dawn to search for cattle, and returning at dusk with dust on his clothes and determination in his eyes. He slept in the barn those first weeks, respecting the proprieties despite the clear understanding growing between him and Naomi. Their courtship unfolded in quiet moments, shared cups of coffee on the porch at sunrise, whispered conversations after Nora had gone to bed, hands finding each other as they worked side by side. There was a naturalness to it, as if they'd known each other for years, rather than the scant weeks of their actual acquaintance. One evening, as summer gave way to fall and the land around them began to shift from green to gold, Naomi found Yates by the corral, watching as the sun set behind the distant mountains. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, joining him at the fence. He smiled at her, that warm, slow smile that never failed to make her heart beat faster. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since I followed that wagon out of Superior." "You regret it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Yates turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Not for a single moment. That day led me to you, and that makes it the luckiest day of my life." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Naomi. "I used to think my father was being romantic when he talked about knowing Mother was the one for him the moment they met," she admitted. "But now I understand." Yates' eyes softened at her words. "Are you saying I'm the one for you, Naomi Lancaster?" "I think you know that I am," she replied, a hint of challenge in her tone. "Then perhaps I should make it official." To her surprise, Yates reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that gleamed in the fading light, a simple gold ring. "I've been carrying this for a week, waiting for the right moment." Naomi's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Naomi. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Jackson." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the simple band a perfect fit, Naomi felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. When he rose and kissed her, it was a promise sealed, a future beginning. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Superior, with Nora as maid of honor and Henry standing proudly as Yates' best man. Sheriff Riley and his deputies attended, along with neighboring ranchers and townspeople who had come to respect the Lancaster sisters and their courageous stand against Silas Corbin. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch for a celebration that lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. As night fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Yates led Naomi away from the festivities for a moment of quiet together. "Happy, Mrs. Jackson?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they stood beneath the stars. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. "And you?" "I spent years wandering," Yates said, his voice thoughtful. "Looking for something I couldn't quite name. Turns out I was looking for you all along." In the years that followed, the Jackson Ranch, as it came to be known, though Naomi insisted on keeping the Lancaster name alongside it in honor of her father, prospered under their joint care. The silver strike that had motivated Corbin's crimes proved substantial enough to provide a comfortable security, without transforming the nature of the land they both loved. Nora, blossoming in the safety and stability of their home, eventually married a young deputy who had been among those who helped bring Corbin to justice. They built a house of their own on the eastern edge of the ranch, close enough for frequent visits, but giving the young couple their independence. Henry Walsh remained with them, becoming like a grandfather to the children who eventually joined the family, first a son they named after Naomi and Nora's father, followed by twin girls who inherited Naomi's spirit and Yates' steady determination. As for Silas Corbin, his trial in Tucson revealed even greater corruption than anyone had suspected, leading to a lengthy prison sentence. His empire crumbled, his ill-gotten properties returned to their rightful owners, or sold to pay restitution to those he had wronged. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Yates and Naomi rode out to the ridge overlooking their land, now expanded and thriving under their care. The setting sun painted the landscape in golds and reds, the same colors that had framed their first days together. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Naomi asked as they sat side by side on their horses. "If you hadn't decided to follow that wagon?" Yates considered the question, his gaze taking in the ranch below the house with smoke curling from its chimney, the healthy cattle grazing in the pastures, the children who would be waiting for them to return for supper. "I think some things are meant to be," he said finally, reaching across to take her hand. "No matter what path we took, I believe I would have found you somehow." Naomi smiled, squeezing his hand, a romantic notion from a practical man. "You bring it out in me," he replied with a smile of his own. "Besides, some things are worth being romantic about." As they rode back down the ridge toward home, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them here from terror and uncertainty to this life of love and purpose. The memory of those dark days had faded, but the strength they had found in each other remained, growing deeper with each passing year. They had built something remarkable together, not just a ranch or a family, but a love that had begun in the midst of danger and flourished in the peace that followed. A love born in the wild heart of the Arizona Territory, as enduring as the land itself. And as their children ran to greet them, faces alight with joy at their parents' return, Naomi knew with absolute certainty that this family, this home, this life with Yates was where she had always been meant to be.